Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into the complete story recap of Reborn as Three Cowboys Ranch Princess, a heartwarming and emotional drama filled with family bonds, unexpected twists, romance, and life-changing moments. Throughout this recap, we'll break down the entire storyline, uncover the most important plot developments, and revisit the unforgettable scenes that made this drama stand out from the rest. Whether you've already watched the series or are discovering it for the first time, this video will guide you through every major moment, from beginning to end. If you enjoy drama recaps, story explanations, and detailed plot breakdowns, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest uploads. Now, sit back, relax, and let's jump straight into the full recap of My Brothers Begged, But I'm the Dragon's Queen.
The skies above the Empire of Solace did not merely darken, they bled into a bruised, terrifying twilight. The sun, usually a brilliant beacon reflecting off the pristine white spires of the royal castle, was blotted out by an expanse of leathery wings. A suffocating pressure descended upon the capital city. The wind howled, carrying with it the scent of ash, ozone, and ancient, unyielding power. In the grand courtyard of the royal palace, panic was a living, breathing entity. Knights in gleaming silver armor scrambled, their formations breaking under the sheer terror of the beast that circled above. The great dragon had come to the castle. It was no longer a myth whispered by nursemaids or a prophecy etched into dusty tomes. It was real, it was furious, and it was here. Standing near the grand marble staircase were the pride of the Solace royal family, the three princes, tall, imposing, and desperate to protect their blood. Behind them cowered Lorella, the newly returned princess. She clutched the fabric of her brother's tunic, her face pale, her eyes wide with a cowardice she barely tried to conceal. "Brother, I'm scared," Lorella shrieked, her voice shrill over the roaring winds. She buried her face into the back of the eldest prince. "I don't want to marry that monster." "Don't worry, Lorella, I'm here," her brother yelled back, drawing his broadsword. The steel caught the dim light, a pathetic sliver of defiance against the colossal shadow above. He stepped forward, his jaw set in stubborn fury. "I want that beast out of the Empire skies. Keep that hideous freak away from my sister." Another brother moved to flank her, his eyes darting frantically toward the descending beast. "Come here, Lorella. Don't be afraid. I will never let that beast snatch you away." From the cold, neglected periphery of the courtyard, another figure watched. Diana. For 18 years, Diana had been the cherished jewel of the Solace family, the beloved little sister, the center of her brother's universe. That was before the truth was uncovered, before they realized she was not of their blood, swapped at birth with the true-born princess, Lorella. Now, dressed in plain, muted fabrics that offered no warmth against the sudden chill, Diana stood entirely alone. The brothers who had once sworn to protect her from every scrape and shadow now did not even glance in her direction. Their shields, their swords, and their hearts were entirely dedicated to the trembling, manipulative girl who had stolen their affections in a matter of days. The ground quaked violently, throwing several guards to their knees. The dragon landed. The courtyard stone splintered and cracked under massive, razor-sharp talons. Its scales were a mesmerizing, terrifying hue of obsidian and dark crimson, pulsing with an inner infernal light. Smoke drifted from its nostrils as its colossal head lowered to eye level with the royal family. Its eyes, massive pools of molten gold, swept past the trembling knights, past the defiant princes, and past the cowering Lorella. The dragon's gaze locked onto Diana. A voice, not spoken aloud but echoing with earth-shattering clarity in the minds of everyone present, rumbled through the courtyard. "You are my fated bride." The princess froze. Lorella peeked out from behind her brother's cape, confusion temporarily replacing her terror. The beast was not looking at the girl with the royal bloodline. It was looking at the discarded, adopted princess. "No, don't hurt them," Diana pleaded softly, taking a hesitant step forward. Despite the sudden, terrifying attention of the apex predator of their world, her first instinct was still to shield the brothers who had so ruthlessly abandoned her. The dragon's golden eyes narrowed, a flash of intelligent anger sparking within them. Its massive head swung slightly toward the three princes, its voice booming with lethal authority. "Defy the oath, and I will raise this city and slaughter your three foolish brothers." The brothers stood paralyzed, their swords trembling in their hands. They had prepared to fight for Lorella, expecting the dragon to demand the girl who possessed the royal dragon scales. They were utterly unprepared for this. "Come at me instead," one of the brothers shouted, trying to regain his composure, stepping between the dragon and Lorella, completely misunderstanding the dragon's intent. "Brother, please, save me." Lorella sobbed loudly, playing the victim even as the beast ignored her entirely. The dragon scoffed, a sound like grinding boulders. It lowered its immense snout closer to Diana, the heat of its breath washing over her pale face. Its voice softened, meant only for her ears, though the raw power of it vibrated in her chest. "They forced you into back-breaking labor," the dragon murmured, its golden eyes reflecting a tragic, unseen history, "and gave all their love to another girl. Yet here you are, sacrificing yourself for them." The great beast let out a low, rumbling sigh. "No, come be my bride." Diana looked at the massive creature. In its terrifying visage, she saw more understanding and mercy than she had seen in her brother's eyes for weeks. A bitter, melancholic smile touched her lips. She glanced back at the three men who used to call her their world. They weren't looking at her. They were busy soothing Lorella's fabricated tears. "This happiness was never mine to begin with," Diana thought, her heart shattering all over again. "Now it's time to give it back." Sensing her hesitation and the deep bleeding wounds of her heart, the dragon lifted its head, rising to its full terrifying height. Its wings unfurled, casting a shadow over the entirety of the palace. "In 7 days' time," the dragon proclaimed, its voice a decree that shook the very foundations of the empire, "either you come with me, or this entire city shall be buried with you." With a final deafening roar that sent the remaining knights scrambling into the dirt, the dragon propelled itself into the sky. The sheer force of its takeoff knocked tapestries from the walls and shattered the stained glass windows of the great hall. In seconds, it was nothing but a dark speck against the bruised clouds, leaving behind a courtyard drowning in deafening silence. Diana watched it disappear, her hands clasped in front of her. "Say goodbye," she told herself silently, looking at her brothers. "They only care for Lorella. Would they even miss me if I left?" The silence did not last. As soon as the dragon was out of sight, the tension snapped, giving way to an absurd, almost hysterical jubilation among the guards and the royals. "The dragon has fled!" A knight shouted from the battlements. "Praise the chancellor and the commander! Glory to the Salis royal family!" Another cried out. Diana watched in disbelief as her brothers puffed out their chests, sheathing their swords with arrogant flair. "Brothers, you are incredible!" Lorella cheered, instantly shedding her cowardly demeanor to shower them with praise. "Your divine might must have scared the dragon away. You saved me and the whole city." "My sister," the eldest brother said, kneeling gently to kiss Lorella's hand, his eyes filled with absolute blinding devotion. "We would lay down our lives for you." Diana felt a sickening twist in her stomach. They truly believed their pathetic display of swordsmanship had frightened away a creature that could level mountains. They had completely ignored the dragon's words, its ultimatum, and its focus on Diana. Taking a deep breath, Diana stepped forward. "Brothers, there's something I need to tell you." Before she could even finish her sentence, the eldest brother whipped around, his expression morphing from tender love to absolute disgust in a fraction of a second. "Drop the pathetic act, Diana," he snapped, his voice lashing out like a whip. "You're being punished because you ruined Lorella's dress and tried to threaten her into leaving." Diana halted, stunned. "I never threatened her," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "As for the dress, she shredded it herself. It was not me." Still lying, the second brother stepped forward, his eyes burning with unwarranted hatred. He raised his hand, magical energy crackling at his fingertips. "Very well, I will extract your memories and expose your lies before us all." Lorella's eyes widened in sudden panic. If he extracted Diana's memories, they would see the truth that Lorella had ripped the gown herself and laughed while framing Diana. "No!" Lorella cried out, stepping in front of her brother, pretending to be merciful. She turned to Diana, crocodile tears instantly welling in her eyes. "Diana, I know you resent me. If I never came home, my brothers would have always loved you as their real sister forever. You stole 18 years of wealth and glory from me. You'll pay the price with your life. Let go of me." Diana cried as two heavy-handed guards seized her arms at a gesture from the eldest prince. "You tried to kill Lorella," a brother yelled, stepping close to Diana's face. "I didn't." Still denying it. "You're jealous of Lorella. You've changed ever since Lorella came back." "I barely know you anymore." Diana stared into the eyes of the man who had once taught her how to ride a horse, who had once stayed awake for 3 nights when she had a childhood fever. Now, those eyes held nothing but icy contempt. "I never changed," Diana whispered, a tear finally breaking free and rolling down her cheek. "It was all of you." The grand hall of the palace, once a place of warmth and laughter for Diana, had become a tribunal of cruelty. She was forced to her knees on the cold marble, her brothers towering over her like executioners. "I know Lorella is your sister by blood, not me," Diana sobbed, her spirit slowly being crushed under the weight of their relentless hatred. "I know you love her. I just wish I had never been a princess at all, so I'd never know the heartbreak of losing my brothers." "Diana," the eldest brother said coldly, completely unmoved by her tears. "If you're willing to change, you're still our sister." Before Diana could respond, Lorella dramatically clutched her chest, letting out a weak, breathy gasp. She collapsed against the nearest brother. "My weak heart is acting up again. It hurts so much. Get the doctor now." The youngest brother screamed in panic, holding Lorella up. The doctor, a shrewd and morally bankrupt man who had quickly allied himself with the new princess, rushed forward. He checked her pulse with feigned urgency. "She is failing," he lied smoothly. "But as we discovered, Diana's blood has healing power. When we used her blood as a cure last time, the princess felt so much better." "Gods," the eldest brother commanded without a second thought, pointing a rigid finger at Diana. "Drag Diana to the dungeon. Bleed her now." "No," Diana screamed, thrashing against the guards who lifted her off the floor. "No, no, no! Brother! Brother, please! No! I'm scared of pain." Her desperate cries echoed off the vaulted ceilings. She looked at her brothers, begging with her eyes, searching for even a sliver of the men who used to adore her. But they were entirely focused on soothing the smirking Lorella. "Lorella needs your blood," the eldest brother said flatly, turning his back on her. "Is this the price?" As she was dragged down the spiraling stone stairs into the dark, damp dungeons beneath the castle, Diana's mind broke. She remembered a time, not so long ago, when she had brought a tray of freshly baked sweets into their war council. They had scolded her gently, saying, "Diana, we told you don't interrupt when we're discussing affairs of state." But then, they had smiled, abandoned their maps, and pulled her into a hug. "Let all that royal business wait. My favorite little sister comes first." Now, she was thrown onto a filthy stone floor. A rusted iron shackle was fastened around her wrist. The royal doctor approached, a sterile blade and an empty bowl in his hands. The contrast between her memories and her reality was too sharp to bear. As the blade sliced into her forearm and her rich, red blood began to drip steadily into the bowl, Diana closed her eyes, letting the darkness of the dungeon consume her. As the cold darkness of the dungeon wrapped around her, Diana's feverish mind drifted away from the pain in her arm. She sought refuge in the past, though the memory she found offered no comfort. It was the memory of the day her life had shattered, the day the grand doors of the throne room had swung open to reveal the architect of her ruin. It had been a morning of bright sunlight and laughter, entirely ordinary until the High Chancellor marched into the Great Hall, flanked by a phalanx of royal guards. Behind him walked a girl dressed in rags, her eyes darting around the opulent room with a mix of awe and calculating greed. "Your Graces," the Chancellor had announced, his voice trembling with the weight of a monumental revelation. "All the royal family has been deceived." Diana remembered standing beside her brothers, her hand resting lightly on the eldest's arm. She had felt him stiffen as the Chancellor brought the strange girl forward. "Lorella is your true sister," the Chancellor declared, the words echoing off the vaulted ceilings like a death knell. "She was born with the dragon scale." With a dramatic flourish, the Chancellor pulled back the collar of the girl's ragged dress. There, resting just above her collarbone, was a shimmering, iridescent patch of skin. It glowed with a faint, magical hum, reflecting the light in hues of emerald and gold. "Proof that she is the dragon's bride foretold in prophecy," the Chancellor continued, bowing deeply. "A blessing born into our royal line only once every 3,000 years. The brothers had stepped forward, utterly mesmerized. The eldest reached out, his fingers trembling as he hovered them over the glowing anomaly. "It really is a dragon scale," he whispered, his eyes wide with reverence. It bonds with the blood of the Salis royal line. He turned back to look at Diana, and for the first time in her life, she saw a chasm open between them. No wonder Diana had no scale. Our true sister was swapped at birth. The youngest brother rushed forward, tears streaming down his face as he pulled the ragged girl into a crushing embrace. My sister! Thank the ancestors! You've finally come home! Over his shoulder, Lorella's eyes met Diana's. The timid, overwhelmed facade dropped for a fraction of a second, replaced by a chilling, victorious smirk. Yes, brothers, Lorella whispered, her voice laced with a hidden, venomous promise. I've returned. Returned to take back everything that belongs to me. The memory faded, violently ripped away by the sharp sting of reality. Brother, it hurts, Diana gasped, her vision swimming as she slumped against the damp stone wall of her cell. The royal doctor pulled the blade away, holding up a wooden bowl filled to the brim with her rich, crimson blood. He handed it reverently to the eldest prince, who stood on the other side of the iron bars, his expression completely devoid of the warmth he had once reserved exclusively for her. Lorella is frail, the prince said, examining the bowl with clinical detachment. He turned to the doctor. One bowl isn't enough. Take another as backup. Please, no more, Diana begged, her voice cracking. The edges of her vision were turning black, a terrifying numbness spreading from her fingertips up her arms. She forced herself to sit upright, rattling her chains. I swore to marry the dragon in 7 days. If I bleed to death, the raging dragon will raze the empire to the ground. The eldest brother sneered, a sound of profound disgust. He gripped the iron bars, looking down at her as if she were a rat that had scurried into his pristine halls. Nonsense, he spat. The Salis royal family made the oath with the dragon. You aren't royal blood. You are a peasant, a cuckoo bird that stole my true sister's nest. How could you possibly be the dragon's bride? The beast looked at me, Diana pleaded, desperately trying to make him understand. He spoke to me. Diana, bear it just a little longer. The second brother chimed in from the shadows, his voice carrying a sickeningly patronizing tone. If you truly love us, you will do this for our family. They didn't believe her. They genuinely thought the great dragon, an ancient and all-knowing entity, cared about the arbitrary bloodlines of mortal kings. They were blinded by their devotion to Lorella and their newfound disgust for the girl they believed had stolen their affection. The doctor approached again, a fresh, empty bowl in his hand. Diana squeezed her eyes shut, turning her face to the damp wall as the cold steel bit into her flesh a second time. When the heavy wooden door of the dungeon finally slammed shut, plunging her cell back into a thick, suffocating gloom, Diana was entirely alone. Her arm was bandaged with a coarse, unwashed rag, and she felt impossibly cold. Every beat of her heart felt like a monumental effort. A soft, frantic chittering broke the silence. From a small crack in the masonry near the floor, a tiny creature squeezed through. It was a ferret, its fur a pristine, snowy white, with intelligent, dark eyes. It scurried across the filthy floor, completely ignoring the scent of stale blood and despair, and leapt into Diana's lap. Mink, Diana whispered, a fragile, broken smile touching her pale lips. She raised her uninjured hand, her fingers trembling violently, and stroked the ferret's soft head. Mink nuzzled frantically into her palm, letting out soft, distressed squeaks as he licked the cold sweat from her knuckles. You're all I have left now, she murmured, her tears finally spilling over, leaving clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. She pulled the small creature close to her chest, burying her face in his warm fur. It was the only warmth left in her world. Mink chittered again, pawing at the fabric of her torn dress. Mama doesn't have snacks today, she cried softly, her heart breaking at her inability to even feed her loyal companion. Are you hungry? You should go, Mink. Find a warm kitchen. There's nothing for you here. Mink simply curled into a tight ball against her stomach, refusing to move. You're saying you'd rather go hungry than leave my side? Diana sobbed quietly into the dark. It was a bitter irony. A wild animal showed her more loyalty and love than the 3 human brothers she had worshipped for 18 years. The fragile piece of the cell was shattered by the sound of approaching footsteps. They were not the heavy, armored boots of the guards, nor the authoritative strides of the princes. These footsteps were light, deliberate, and accompanied by the soft rustle of expensive silk. The light of a single, flickering lantern spilled into the cell. Lorella stood on the other side of the bars. She looked radiant. She was draped in a gown of spun silver and midnight blue velvet, a gown that had originally been tailored for Diana. Her hair was perfectly styled, adorned with diamonds that caught the lantern light. The image of the frail, terrified victim was completely gone. Lorella's eyes darted down to Diana's lap. A cruel, delighted smile curled her lips. "What a beautiful little ferret," Lorella cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She stepped closer to the bars. "What a shame the fur is pierced. Otherwise, it would make a lovely stole." Diana instinctively curled her body around Mink, shielding him from Lorella's predatory gaze. "Leave him alone. Haven't you taken enough?" Lorella laughed, a sharp grating sound that echoed off the damp walls. She reached into the folds of her gown and pulled out a heavy iron key, casually unlocking the cell door. She stepped inside, towering over the weakened Diana. "You want to save it?" Lorella mocked, her eyes flashing with malice. "Who's going to save you?" With a sudden, violent motion, Lorella grabbed the collar of her own gown and yanked it down, exposing the glowing dragon scale on her chest. But up close, the glow was not pure. It was a sickly, pulsating red, and the skin around it looked inflamed and angry. "This cursed scale," Lorella hissed, all pretense of royalty vanishing, leaving only a bitter, ruthless girl. "Only your blood can feed it." Diana stared in horror, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. Her blood wasn't healing a weak heart. It was sustaining a magical lie. "Bearing it makes me a target of the dragon," Lorella continued, her face contorting with a mix of fear and greed. "But it's given me everything I want. Love, wealth, power." She leaned down, grabbing Diana by the chin with a vice-like grip, her fingernails digging into Diana's soft skin. "I'll drain you dry to keep it," Lorella promised, her breath warm and foul. She threw Diana's head back against the stone. "Be a good girl, and I'll let you live." Mink, sensing the threat to his master, suddenly leapt from Diana's lap, hissing fiercely. He darted toward Lorella, tiny teeth bared in defense. "No, Mink!" Diana screamed, lunging forward despite her weakness. Lorella's eyes widened in brief panic before morphing into pure, murderous rage. "Defy me!" she shrieked, her foot lashing out with brutal, unforgiving force. "And this is your fate!" The dungeon echoed with a sickening thud, followed by a sudden, absolute silence. The sickening thud echoed against the cold, damp walls of the dungeon. Mink, the tiny, fiercely loyal ferret who had been Diana's only comfort, was thrown violently across the cell. His small, snowy white body struck the jagged stone wall with a terrible, unnatural crack. He dropped to the filthy floor, completely motionless. "Mink!" Diana shrieked. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony tearing from the very bottom of her soul. She crawled across the freezing floor, her chains rattling, ignoring the throbbing pain in her bandaged arm. She reached the small, still form and scooped him into her trembling hands. His warmth was already fading. The bright, intelligent eyes that had looked at her with such unconditional love just moments ago were now blank and vacant. "Help!" Diana screamed, clutching the lifeless animal to her chest. "Someone, help me! Please, let me go!" Heavy footsteps thundered down the stone staircase. The heavy iron door of the dungeon burst open, and her three brothers rushed in, their swords drawn, expecting to find an assassin. Instead, they found Lorella standing over Diana, breathing heavily. In a fraction of a second, Lorella's demeanor completely transformed. She violently tore the sleeve of her own pristine gown and dragged her manicured nails down her forearm, drawing a thin line of blood. She collapsed against the bars, sobbing hysterically. Lorella, the youngest brother, cried out, catching her as she feigned weakness. "What happened?" I just wanted to bring her food," Lorella wept, burying her face into her brother's chest. She pointed a trembling finger at the weeping Diana. "But she told her ferret to bite me. Then she tried to kill me." Diana looked up from Mink's lifeless body, her eyes swollen and red, her mind unable to comprehend the sheer audacity of the lie. "She's lying!" Diana screamed, pointing her own bloody finger at the girl. "She killed him! She killed Mink!" The eldest brother stepped forward, his boots crunching loudly on the dungeon floor. He did not look at the dead animal in Diana's lap. He only looked at the scratch on Lorella's arm, his face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and utter disgust. "Diana," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet timbre, "when did you become so savage? Brother, please, you have to believe me, we were almost too late, the second brother interrupted, his eyes burning with fury. What were you about to do to our sister? I didn't do anything, Diana sobbed, clutching Mink tighter. The eldest brother unsheathed a leather riding crop from his belt. The sound of the leather uncoiling made Diana flinch. You have disappointed me, he said, his voice entirely devoid of mercy. This is your punishment. You need to learn never to touch Lorella again. The first strike of the crop cracked through the air like thunder, drowning out Diana's desperate pleas. Hours later, the dungeon was silent again, save for Diana's ragged breathing. Upstairs, in the opulent, warmly lit corridors of the castle, the three brothers walked together. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving a heavy, uncomfortable tension in its wake. The second brother paused by a large window overlooking the courtyard, his brow furrowed in thought. Did we go too far? He murmured, breaking the silence. He looked down at his hands, a flicker of guilt passing through his eyes. After all, it was Lorella who killed Mink first. They had seen it. In the brief moment before they burst through the door, they had seen Lorella deliver the fatal kick. Yet, they had chosen to believe her theatrical tears. They had chosen to punish Diana anyway. The youngest brother leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. I was being rash, he admitted quietly. Diana might not share our royal blood, but we've always treated her as our sister. Since she was a baby, how could we do this to her? For a fleeting, beautiful moment, the truth hung in the air. The realization that they were torturing the girl who had loved them unconditionally for 18 years threatened to break through their delusion. But the eldest brother, the heir to the Solace throne, stepped forward and shattered it. His face was a mask of cold resolve. We have only one sister, he stated, his voice hard and final. Lorella, she was lost to us, suffering for 18 long years in poverty while that cuckoo bird lived in the lap of luxury. He turned to his younger brothers, his eyes flashing with grim determination. The dragon comes in a matter of days. Even if it costs me my life, I will never let my true sister marry that monster. Diana must be the one to pay the price. We must harden our hearts. The guilt in the younger brother's eyes was quickly snuffed out, replaced by a blind, fanatical devotion to their bloodline. The eldest brother had spoken. The seal on Diana's fate was locked. Down in the suffocating darkness of the cell, Diana sat rocking back and forth. She had wrapped Mink's small, broken body in a torn piece of her skirt. Mink, in my arms, she whispered, a broken lullaby escaping her cracked lips. You won't be cold anymore. The physical pain from her wounds was immense, but it was the agony in her heart that truly paralyzed her. To escape the horrors of the present, her mind dragged her back to a time when she was loved. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, the damp cell walls melted away, replaced by the warm, golden glow of a sunlit garden. It was her 7th birthday. Diana, my dearest sister, the eldest brother's voice echoed in her memory, warm and full of laughter. Happy 7th birthday! She remembered running through the rose gardens, wearing a dress of pure white silk. She remembered her second brother, Benedict, who had suffered a terrible fever that temporarily stole his vision. He had sat on a stone bench, looking lost and frightened. Forgive your brother, Benedict had said sadly, reaching out to touch the petals of a flower. Roses were the only flowers I knew before I lost my sight. Little Diana had run to him, taking his hands in hers. Benedict, I'll be your eyes. She had promised fiercely. And she had been. She had guided him for months, never leaving his side until his sight returned. Then came the grand reveal. The brothers had blindfolded her, leading her to the west wing of the castle. Diana, look, the youngest brother had said, pulling off the blindfold. It's my gift for your birthday. It was the most magnificent bedroom in the empire. Hand-carved wooden furniture, walls draped in the finest silks, and a grand bed fit for a queen. We designed this room ourselves, just for you, the eldest brother had said proudly, lifting her onto his shoulders. The Empire's one and only princess, our baby sister, deserves the very best in the world. The memory violently twisted. The beautiful bedroom faded, replaced by the harsh reality of just a few days ago, when Lorella had first arrived. Lorella had walked into that very bedroom, her eyes wide with greed. How dare you steal from Lorella? The eldest brother had bellowed at Diana, ripping her personal belongings from the wardrobe. From now on, you sleep here. He had pointed to a damp servant's closet, and eventually, the dungeon. I didn't, brother, Diana had wept, clinging to his arm. Don't abandon me. Sitting in the dark, cradling her dead ferret, the 19-year-old Diana finally understood. The brothers she loved were dead. The men upstairs were strangers who merely wore their faces. I miss how things used to be, she whispered to the empty cell, her tears finally running dry. The temperature in the dungeon suddenly plummeted. The flickering lantern on the wall instantly extinguished, plunging the room into absolute pitch-black darkness. Diana froze, clutching Mink tightly. The air grew impossibly heavy, smelling of ozone and ancient fire, the exact scent she had smelled in the courtyard when the great beast descended from the sky. From the shadows, a figure materialized. It was a man, yet not a man. He wore flowing robes of obsidian black, and his eyes were pools of molten gold, glowing with a terrifying inner light. They were the exact eyes of the dragon. He stepped gracefully through the solid iron bars of her cell as if they were made of mist. He looked down at the bruised, bloodied girl sitting on the filthy floor. His golden eyes softened with profound sorrow and deep, ancient reverence. "Bride whom the great dragon has chosen," the man spoke. His voice was entirely human, yet it carried a strange, dual resonance, vibrating against her very bones. "You should not be rotting among the filth." Diana did not flinch. After everything she had endured, a phantom in the dark held no terror for her. "Who are you?" "I am the eyes of the great dragon," the envoy replied, bowing deeply at the waist, a gesture of respect no one in this castle had shown her in weeks. "Tomorrow is the wedding day. The great dragon wishes to offer a wedding gift to you." The envoy straightened up, and the golden light in his eyes flared dangerously. The temperature in the room spiked, the damp walls instantly drying from the sudden, oppressive heat. "Say the word," the envoy commanded, his voice echoing with lethal promise, "and the great dragon is willing to obliterate this royal city on the day of your union. Every knight, every prince, and the false princess shall burn for what they have done to you." Diana looked down at the blood-soaked bandages on her arm. She thought of the whip. She thought of Mink. She thought of the cruel, gloating smile on Lorella's face. She had every reason to say yes. She had every reason to let the dragon turn Solace into a mountain of ash. Slowly, Diana looked up into the glowing golden eyes of the envoy. She shook her head. "No need," she whispered softly. The envoy blinked, clearly surprised. "You grant them mercy? After all they've done?" Diana gently stroked the cold fur of the ferret in her arms. A profound, tragic peace settled over her features. The anger and the desperation were gone, burned away by the finality of her decision. "What I've lost was never meant to be mine," Diana said, her voice steady and clear. "The 18 years of joy, I was living a borrowed life. I will not end it in blood. By giving myself to the dragon, I repay the love and the grace my brothers once gave me. After tomorrow, our debts are settled forever." The envoy stared at her for a long, silent moment. The anger in his golden eyes faded, replaced by an overwhelming awe. He knelt before her, pressing his fist over his heart. "Your kindness and grace deserve the reverence of the great dragon," the envoy vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "Tomorrow, he will receive you with the grandest ceremony." The envoy dissolved into the shadows, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and a strange, comforting warmth. Diana leaned back against a stone wall, closing her eyes. "I leave tomorrow," she whispered into the dark. "I hoped for a proper goodbye, but it seems I'll be leaving without a word. Farewell, brothers. I once loved you with all my heart." Dawn broke over the Empire of Solace, but it brought no light. The sky was a suffocating canvas of bruised purples and unnatural crimson. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of sulfur and impending doom. The 7th day had arrived, the day of the oath, the day of the dragon's return. Inside the grand courtyard, the atmosphere was a volatile mix of terror and desperate bravado. The Solace royal knights were lined up, their silver armor clanking nervously in the chilling wind. At the forefront stood the 3 princes, clad in their heaviest battle gear. Their faces were pale but set with a stubborn, foolish resolve. "Hold the line!" the eldest brother roared, drawing his broadsword. The steel gleamed defiantly under the darkened sky. "We will not let this monster destroy the Empire and harm Lorella. Formation! Formation!" the second and third brothers echoed, taking their places beside him. They raised their shields, creating a wall of steel between the gates of the castle and the trembling figure hiding behind them. Lorella was weeping, clutching the skirts of her luxurious gown, her hands shaking violently. The glowing scale on her chest pulsed with a frantic, terrified rhythm. The illusion of her grand destiny was shattering under the weight of reality. From the shadows of the courtyard pillars, a frail figure emerged. "Diana." The dungeon guards had fled in terror as the sky darkened, leaving her cell unlocked. She walked slowly, her steps uneven, her arms still heavily bandaged. She wore the tattered remnants of her plain dress, her hair unkempt, yet she carried herself with a quiet, heartbreaking dignity. A deafening roar ripped through the heavens, cracking the stone beneath their feet. The wind exploded violently, knocking several knights to the ground. The great dragon descended. It did not land. It hovered just above the courtyard, a massive titan of obsidian and gold, its leathery wings blotting out the remaining slivers of daylight. Its golden eyes, glowing like miniature suns, locked onto the pathetic line of defense the brothers had formed. "Brothers, please!" Diana screamed, running toward the front lines, her voice tearing through the howling wind. She saw the immense claws of the beast flexing, ready to rend steel and flesh alike. "Offer me to the dragon! I cannot bear to see you get hurt because of me." The eldest brother glanced over his shoulder at her, his face twisted in a mask of fanatical denial. "No! We will never let the dragon take you!" He turned back to his knights, his voice echoing with absolute madness. "Everyone, protect Lorella at all costs." They still believed it was about Lorella. They still believed the dragon wanted the girl with the royal blood, not the cuckoo bird they had cast aside. The dragon let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the very bones of everyone in the courtyard. It opened its massive maw, a terrifying glow of infernal fire building deep within its throat. "Brothers, save me!" Lorella shrieked, dropping to her knees. Her facade completely crumbled. She grabbed the youngest brother's leg, pulling at his armor. "Don't let the dragon take me! Lorella, we'll defend you with our lives!" The youngest brother shouted, tears streaming down his face, blinded by his misguided love. "We die together." "No, I don't want to die!" Lorella screamed, her voice turning ugly, shrill, and vicious. She violently shoved her youngest brother toward the beast. "Go drive the dragon back. Stand up and guard me." The brothers froze. For a fraction of a second, the roar of the wind seemed to fade, replaced by the chilling reality of Lorella's words. "Have you forgotten?" Lorella shrieked, her face contorted in a mask of pure, selfish survival, utterly devoid of the innocent sweetness she had weaponized against them. "I'm your only sister. You are supposed to die for me." The eldest brother's sword dropped a fraction of an inch. He looked back at Lorella, his eyes widening as the illusion shattered. This was the girl they had tortured Diana for. This was the true-born princess, a coward who demanded their deaths to save her own skin. Above them, the dragon's patience evaporated. "Since you stubbornly insist on protecting this woman," the beast's voice boomed in their minds, echoing with ancient apocalyptic fury, "then die." The fiery glow in the dragon's throat intensified, turning from a deep orange to a blinding, blinding white. The heat was instantaneous, blistering the paint off the knights' shields. The brothers squeezed their eyes shut, raising their weapons in a futile, hopeless final stand. They were going to burn. "Let them go." The voice was not loud, but it possessed a strange, magical resonance that cut perfectly through the chaos. The blinding light in the dragon's throat paused. Diana stepped out from behind the line of knights. She walked directly past her frozen brothers. She did not look at them. She did not look at the cowering Lorella. She kept her eyes fixed entirely on the apex predator of the skies. She stopped in the very center of the courtyard, a tiny, fragile figure standing alone against a god of fire and scale. The wind whipped her tattered dress around her bruised legs, but she did not tremble. "I will come with you," Diana said softly, though the dragon heard her perfectly. The dragon lowered its colossal head, the infernal light fading from its throat. It brought its snout within inches of her face. The heat of its breath enveloped her, but it did not burn. It felt like a warm, protective embrace. The golden eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with such reverence in the dark of the dungeon, gazed down at her. The brothers watched in absolute, paralyzed horror. The girl they had beaten, bled, and thrown away was standing as a shield between them and certain annihilation. "Diana," the eldest brother whispered, his voice cracking, the full weight of his colossal mistake finally crashing down upon his soul. He reached a hand out toward her, his sword clattering uselessly to the stone floor. "Diana, please." But it was too late. The chasm they had dug could never be crossed. Diana reached out her small, bandaged hand and rested it gently against the dragon's massive, obsidian snout. A brilliant, blinding pulse of golden magic erupted from the point of contact, washing over the courtyard. She looked up into the eyes of the beast, offering a serene, melancholic smile. She had lost her family, but she was finally free. "My husband," Diana declared, her voice ringing out with the unquestionable authority of a queen, leaving her brothers weeping in the dust of her departure. "Today, I become your bride." The moment Diana's hand touched the dragon's coarse, obsidian snout, the suffocating winds that had terrorized the courtyard abruptly ceased. The deafening roar of the storm was replaced by a profound, ethereal silence. A golden shockwave of pure, ancient magic pulsed from their point of contact. It swept across the stone tiles, knocking the knights off their feet and sending the three princes crashing to their knees. As the light washed over Diana, the tattered, blood-stained rags of her dress began to dissolve. In their place, threads of glowing light wove themselves into existence, cascading down her frail frame. When the light faded, Diana was no longer dressed as a discarded prisoner. She was draped in a breathtaking gown of midnight silk and liquid gold, the very colors of the dragon's scales. The rough bandages on her arms dissolved into thin air, and the flesh beneath was completely healed, unblemished, and radiating a soft, healthy warmth. The dragon lowered its massive wing, creating a natural ramp. Without a single backward glance, Diana stepped onto the leathery expanse and began her ascent. "Diana," the eldest brother screamed, his voice shattering the silence. He scrambled forward, his heavy armor scraping against the cracked stones. He reached out with a trembling, bloodied hand. "Diana, please, come back. We were wrong. I was wrong." "Sister," the youngest brother wept, burying his face in the dirt, the realization of his betrayal finally breaking his spirit. "Don't leave us." Diana reached the crook of the dragon's neck. She stood tall, her golden gown billowing in the sudden updraft as the great beast prepared for flight. She looked down at the three men who were weeping in the dust, their faces contorted with an agony that would haunt them for the rest of their natural lives. She felt no anger. She felt no triumph. Only a quiet, absolute finality. The dragon let out a majestic, earth-shaking roar that was no longer a threat, but a declaration of victory. With a single, powerful thrust of its legs, it launched into the sky. The sheer force of its departure shattered the remaining glass in the castle and blew the massive iron gates off their hinges. Within seconds, the great beast and its radiant queen were nothing but a brilliant star of gold ascending into the clearing sky, leaving the Empire of Solace far behind. Down in the ruined courtyard, the sky slowly began to return to its normal, pale blue. But the shadows that had fallen over the royal family would never lift. The eldest brother remained on his knees, staring blankly at the empty sky. His hands were numb. The sister who had baked him sweets, who had smiled at him with unconditional adoration, who had offered her life to save his, was gone forever. A ragged, agonizing scream tore his attention away from the clouds. He turned to see Lorella thrashing on the ground. The youngest brother was trying to hold her, but she was burning. The dragon scale on her chest, the false token that had granted her so much power and arrogance, was now glowing with a virulent, toxic red light. "It burns!" Lorella shrieked, clawing desperately at her own flesh. "Make it stop! Brother, help me!" The royal doctor rushed forward, but as soon as his hand neared the glowing scale, his skin blistered, and he recoiled in terror. The magic of the scale, no longer sustained by Diana's pure, selfless blood, was turning into a parasite. It was consuming the host that was unworthy of carrying it. Her blood. "We need Diana's blood." The second brother panicked, looking around frantically. But the wooden bowls they had so cruelly filled were shattered, their contents spilled and dried into the dirt. The eldest brother slowly stood up, dropping his sword. He looked at Lorella, the true sister who had demanded they die for her, the girl who had murdered an innocent creature out of pure spite, the liar who had turned them into monsters. "Diana is gone," the eldest brother whispered, his voice hollow and dead. He stepped away from the thrashing girl, and she took our souls with her. There would be no salvation for Lorella, and there would be no peace for the brothers. They would rule their empire, but they would do so from a castle filled with ghosts, forever haunted by the memory of the sister they had thrown away, and the dragon who had known her worth. Far above the clouds, beyond the reach of the mortal world, the great dragon soared. The air here was not thin or freezing, but warm and vibrating with ancient, soothing magic. Diana leaned against the dragon's warm scales, her eyes closed as the wind whipped through her hair. The pain, the betrayal, and the sorrow of the past week were peeling away from her heart like dead leaves in a gentle breeze. Eventually, the dragon began its descent. They broke through a thick bank of golden clouds, revealing a landscape that defied human imagination. Massive floating islands of jade and amethyst drifted in an endless sunset sky. Waterfalls of shimmering, liquid crystal cascaded into the empty air, turning into rainbows. In the center of it all was a towering palace carved entirely from obsidian and illuminated by eternal fire. The dragon landed gracefully in the grand courtyard of the floating palace. Diana slid down its wing, her golden gown trailing behind her. As soon as her feet touched the smooth, warm stone, the massive beast began to shift. The obsidian scales rippled, dissolving into a vortex of golden light and shadow. When the light faded, the dragon was gone. In its place stood the man from the dungeon. He wore the same flowing robes of black, but now he wore a crown of intricate dark metal upon his brow. His golden eyes were no longer terrifying. They were filled with profound warmth and a tenderness that took Diana's breath away. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Slowly, reverently, he knelt on one knee before her, taking her small hand in his. "Welcome home, my queen," he said, his voice the dual-toned rumble she remembered, sending a pleasant shiver down her spine. Diana looked at him, her heart fluttering. You are the dragon." He smiled, a gentle, human expression that transformed his fierce face into something breathtakingly handsome. "I am the Dragon King, and you, Diana, are the bride the stars themselves chose for me. But I have no royal blood," she whispered, the old insecurities whispering in the back of her mind. "I have no scale. I am a cuckoo bird, a peasant." The Dragon King stood, raising his hand to gently cup her cheek. His thumb brushed away a stray tear she hadn't realized she was shedding. "Royal blood is a mortal delusion. Scales are merely armor." He spoke softly, his golden eyes locking onto hers. "True royalty is measured by the purity of the soul, by the capacity for self-sacrifice, and by the strength to show mercy to those who deserve only wrath. You bore the weight of their sins, and you offered your life for theirs. You are more royal than any king who sits on a throne of stone." He took her hand and led her up the grand, obsidian steps toward the glowing doors of the palace. "In my realm, you will never know the cold of a dungeon," the Dragon King promised, his voice echoing across the floating islands. "You will never shed another tear of sorrow, and you will never go hungry." From the shadows of the palace pillars, small creatures began to emerge. Spirits of the air, ethereal foxes with tails of fire, and tiny, chittering creatures that looked remarkably like a certain snowy ferret. One of them, glowing with a soft, white light, scurried down the steps and leapt into Diana's arms. Diana gasped, burying her face into the glowing fur, sobbing a final time not out of grief, but out of an overwhelming, miraculous joy. Mink, or a spiritual remnant of him, was here. The Dragon King had saved his soul. She looked up at her husband, the ancient, terrifying beast who had become her ultimate savior. He smiled down at her, offering his arm. Diana took it. She turned her back on the mortal world below, on the brothers who were left to drown in their own regrets, and on the false princess who was burning in her own greed. She stepped through the grand doors of the Obsidian Palace, not as a discarded princess, but as the one and only queen of the dragons. Her borrowed life was over. Her true eternity had just begun. Time in the mortal realm moved mercilessly, uncaring of the tragedies that had fractured the Solace royal family. Lorella did not die immediately on the day the dragon departed, but her survival was a fate far worse than a quick, fiery end. Months turned into years, but the shadow of the dragon never truly lifted from the capital city. The sky above the castle remained perpetually gray, choked by an invisible ash of regret. The dragon scale, the very thing she had paraded as proof of her divine right, had rejected her. Without Diana's pure, selfless blood to pacify its ancient magic, the scale became a parasitic curse. It spread across her chest like shattered glass, turning her skin a sickly, necrotic gray. The opulent gowns she had stolen from Diana's wardrobe hung loosely on her deteriorating frame. She spent her days confined to the dungeon, the exact same damp, lightless cell where she had tormented Diana and murdered Mink. It was the only place cold enough to soothe the agonizing, burning sensation that ravaged her body. "Brother," Lorella's voice, once shrill and demanding, was now a raspy, pitiful wheeze that echoed up the spiral stone steps. "Brother, please. It hurts. Give me the cure. Find her. Find Diana." But no one came. The royal doctors had abandoned the castle long ago, terrified of the curse that clung to the false princess. The guards, recognizing that the divine mandate had left the royal family, deserted their posts by the hundreds. Solace was rotting from the inside out, and Lorella was its decaying heart. She was left alone with the ghosts of her own cruelty, clutching the rusted iron bars of her cage until her dying breath, forever cursed by the scale she had coveted. The three princes of Solace kept their crowns, but they lost their kingdom. The neighboring empires, sensing the sudden weakness and the withdrawal of the dragon's ancient protection, began to close in on Solace's borders. Trade routes dried up. The crops in the outer provinces withered under the perpetually gray skies. The prosperity they had enjoyed for 18 years, a prosperity entirely tied to Diana's quiet, unknowingly magical presence, shattered. The eldest brother, once a proud and imposing warrior, aged decades in the span of a few years. His hair turned stark white, his armor grew tarnished, and the broadsword he had drawn against the dragon remained sheathed, heavy with the weight of his monumental failure. Every evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the three brothers would gather in the grand courtyard. They stood on the exact cracked stone tiles where Diana had last stood. "Do you think she looks down on us?" the youngest brother whispered one evening, his eyes hollow, staring up at the darkening clouds. He clutched a small, worn piece of white fabric in his hands, the very rag Diana had used to wrap her lifeless ferret. It was the only physical remnant of her they had left. "She doesn't look at us at all," Benedict, the second brother, replied bitterly. The magical healing Diana had once provided him for his eyesight was beginning to fail, the edges of his vision blurring back into darkness, a poetic, agonizing reminder of what he had thrown away. Why would a goddess look down at the worms that crawled in her dirt? The eldest brother said nothing. He simply knelt on the cold stone, bowing his head in a silent, unending plea for forgiveness that would never be heard and would never be granted. They had chosen a cuckoo bird over an eagle, and now they were destined to rule over nothing but a kingdom of ashes and ghosts. Far removed from the decaying world of mortals, the realm of gold thrived in perpetual, breathtaking twilight. Diana stood on the balcony of the grand obsidian palace, overlooking the floating islands of amethyst and jade. The air was thick with the scent of blooming night jasmine and the sweet ozone tang of ancient magic. She wore a crown of woven starlight and dark metal, sitting comfortably upon her dark hair. She was no longer the frail, terrified girl who had bled on a dungeon floor. She was radiant, exuding a quiet, boundless power. The Dragon King had shared more than just his realm with her. He had shared his life force. The magic of the dragons now flowed through her veins, granting her immortality and a deep, intrinsic connection to the mythical creatures of the realm. A soft, familiar chittering drew her attention. Mink, now a majestic spiritual familiar with a coat that shimmered like fresh snowfall, scurried up the balcony railing and perched proudly on her shoulder. He nuzzled her cheek, radiating a comforting, eternal warmth. "You're greedy today, little one," Diana laughed softly, her voice melodic and entirely free of sorrow. She manifested a small, glowing crystal of pure magical energy in her palm, which Mink eagerly nibbled on. Heavy, silent footsteps approached from behind. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against a broad, solid chest. The Dragon King rested his chin on the top of her head, his molten gold eyes looking out over the paradise they ruled together. "The wind carries whispers from the lower realms," the Dragon King murmured, his deep, resonant voice vibrating against her back. "The Empire of Solace is crumbling. Its false kings weep in the dirt." He paused, his grip tightening slightly. "Say the word, my queen, and I will descend to end their misery." Diana leaned back into his embrace, her hands coming up to rest over his. She looked down at the swirling sea of clouds that separated her from her past. The anger that had briefly flared in her heart on the day of her departure had long since been replaced by an absolute, unshakable peace. "No," Diana said softly, a serene smile touching her lips. "Leave them to the fate they carved for themselves. To destroy them would be to acknowledge they still hold a place in my heart." She turned in his arms, looking up into the eyes of the ancient, terrifying beast who had shown her more humanity than mankind ever could. She reached up, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "My heart belongs entirely to the sky," she whispered. The Dragon King smiled, a fierce, devoted expression that belonged to her and her alone. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted of fire and eternal devotion. Below them, the mortal world withered under the weight of its own cruelty, but high above, the dragon's queen reigned supreme, bathed in the light of an endless golden dawn. The great beasts of the Golden Realm do not usually concern themselves with the fleeting, fragile lives of mortals. To a dragon, a human life is but a spark in the dark, brief, chaotic, and easily extinguished. But an oath sworn by the ancient bloodlines is a tether that transcends time. High above the clouds, resting in his obsidian palace, the Dragon King felt the tug of that ancient tether. 3,000 years had passed since his ancestors had struck a bargain with the first kings of Solace. The prophecy dictated that a bride of profound magic, marked by the dragon scale, would be born to unite their realms. Through the ethereal pools of his scrying chamber, the Dragon King peered down into the mortal world to gaze upon his fated bride. What he saw disgusted him. He saw Lorella. He saw the glowing scale on her chest. Yes, but beneath it, her soul was a swamp of greed, cowardice, and rot. The magic within the scale was suffocating, turning toxic as it bonded with a host so utterly devoid of nobility. The men of Solace, the three foolish princes, worshipped this rot, blinded by their obsession with bloodlines. But then, the Dragon King's golden eyes shifted to the shadows of the castle. He saw the girl they called the Cuckoo Bird. He watched Diana. He watched her mend the torn garments of the servants. He watched her cradle a blind brother in the gardens, radiating a pure, selfless love that no mortal magic could fake. And, to his mounting fury, he watched as her family cast her into the damp, lightless depths of the dungeon. He watched them bleed her to feed the parasite on Lorella's chest. Diana possessed no scale. She possessed no royal blood. But as the Dragon King watched her weep over the broken body of a tiny white ferret, refusing to surrender her empathy even in the face of unspeakable cruelty, he realized the truth. The scale was merely a compass. Diana was the true north. They force her into backbreaking labor. The Dragon King had rumbled, his voice shaking the foundations of his floating islands, causing the skies of his realm to darken with his wrath. They bleed the only pure soul in their wretched kingdom. He did not descend to the Empire of Solace to claim a prophecy. He descended to wage a war of salvation. When he landed in the grand courtyard, the scent of fear from the knights was pathetic. He ignored the broadswords. He ignored the cowering false princess. His golden eyes searched only for the girl in the tattered dress. When she stepped forward, offering herself to save the very men who had tortured her, the Dragon King's ancient, immortal heart skipped a beat. He had expected to find a mortal to fulfill an oath. Instead, he found a spirit so radiant it humbled a god. When she placed her small bandaged hand against his snout, the surge of magic that erupted was not from the scale, but from the union of two souls recognizing their equal. As he carried her into the sky, leaving the ash and ruin of Solace behind, the Dragon King made a new vow not to the ancestors but to the girl trembling on his wings. He would build her a paradise. He would wipe the memory of her pain from existence. She was no longer Diana of Solace. She was the queen of the Golden Realm, and for as long as the stars burned in the sky, she would never be discarded again. The realm of gold was vast, older than the stars that peppered its twilight skies, and governed by ancient laws. While the Dragon King reigned supreme, his court was filled with the Elder Worms, ancient beings of immense power who had slept beneath the floating islands for millennia. News of the king taking a mortal bride, a human without the sacred dragon scale, had rippled through the ethereal winds, waking the elders from their slumber. Diana had spent 3 peaceful moons in the Obsidian Palace, learning the ways of the magical realm. She discovered that her presence alone caused the crystalline flora to bloom brighter. The spiritual creatures, including the revived mink, flocked to her, drawn by a soul completely devoid of malice. Yet, as she stood before the grand obsidian mirror in her chambers, wearing a crown of woven starlight, she felt a tremor shake the very foundations of the palace. The Dragon King, who had been standing by the balcony, turned instantly, his molten gold eyes narrowing. "The elders have awoken," he murmured, his voice laced with a dangerous warning. "They summon the court. Are they angry?" Diana asked, stepping toward him. She felt no fear, only a quiet curiosity. The terrified girl from the Solace dungeons was a distant memory. The king took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "They are proud, and they are blind to what truly matters. They believe a human without the scale is unfit to sit upon the obsidian throne. But do not fret, my queen. I will turn them to ash before I let them disrespect you." Diana smiled gently, resting her free hand against his chest. "There has been enough ash, my love. Let me face them." The dragon court was held in the Cavern of Echoes, a colossal hollow within the largest floating island. The walls were lined with glowing amethyst veins, and the air crackled with raw, untamed magic. As Diana and the Dragon King entered, the cavern was already filled with massive, imposing figures. Some elders remained in their draconic forms, titans of silver, emerald, and sapphire scales, while others took humanoid shapes, clad in armor that seemed forged from the cosmos itself. As Diana stepped onto the central dais, a heavy, oppressive silence fell over the cavern. "Is this the fragile creature you have bound our realm to?" hissed an elder of deep forest green scales, his eyes flashing with disdain. "She bears no scale. She carries no ancient blood. She is a whisper in the wind, destined to fade." The Dragon King stepped forward, the temperature in the cavern spiking violently as his aura flared with lethal intent. But before he could speak, Diana gently touched his arm, stepping in front of him. She looked up at the towering green worm, her posture straight, her chin held high. The midnight silk of her gown rippled as the magical currents of the cave washed over her. "I bear no scale." Diana's voice rang out clear and melodic, carrying effortlessly to the furthest corners of the massive cavern. For the scale that was meant to be a blessing became a curse of greed in the mortal world. It rotted the heart of the one who bore it, and it blinded the kings who worshipped it. An elder in silver armor scoffed, stepping forward. "Words are wind, mortal. The obsidian throne requires power. It requires the strength to soothe the realm's deepest wounds. What power does a castaway possess?" To prove his point, the silver elder gestured to the back of the cavern. From the shadows, a massive, chained beast was brought forward. It was a shadow drake, a creature born from the corrupted magic of the void. Its scales were jagged and weeping black mist, its eyes wide with feral agony. It thrashed violently against its magical bindings, shrieking in pain. "This creature's core is fractured," the silver elder challenged. "It is pure chaos. A true queen of the dragons commands the magic of life and order. Calm the beast, mortal, or step down from the throne." The Dragon King's eyes blazed with fury. "You dare test her with a void-corrupted drake? This is a death sentence, not a trial." He moved to strike the chains, but Diana stopped him once more. "I can do this," she whispered to him, her eyes fixed on the thrashing creature. She recognized that kind of pain. It was the frantic, terrifying agony of being misunderstood, of being entirely consumed by a darkness that was not your own. It was the same pain she had felt in the Dungeon of Solace. Diana walked slowly down the dais, approaching the shadow drake. The beast snapped its jaws, spewing a wave of black, necrotic mist toward her. The elders watched, expecting her to flee or be consumed. Instead, Diana raised her hand. A brilliant, blinding pulse of golden magic, the exact same magic she had manifested in the courtyard of Solace, erupted from her palm. It parted the black mist like a curtain. She did not flinch. She did not raise a weapon. She simply walked up to the terrifying beast and gently pressed her hands against its jagged, corrupted snout. "You are in so much pain," Diana whispered, her voice resonating not just in the cavern, but within the beast's fractured mind. "But you are not alone anymore. You do not need to fight." She poured her empathy, her boundless capacity for love, and the pure dragon magic her husband had shared with her directly into the beast. The golden light spread from her hands, washing over the shadow drake's body. The black mist dissolved. The jagged scales smoothed out, shifting from the color of the void to a brilliant, shimmering sapphire. The beast stopped thrashing. Its frantic, feral eyes softened, glowing with a peaceful blue light. It let out a soft, rumbling purr and bowed its massive head, pressing it affectionately against Diana's chest, much like her tiny ferret mink used to do. The cavern was completely, utterly silent. The elders stared in absolute shock. A void-corrupted drake was considered a lost cause, a creature that even the oldest among them would simply execute to end its misery. And yet, this fragile human had healed it with nothing but a touch and a pure heart. Diana turned back to face the court, her golden aura still softly glowing around her. The sapphire drake sat obediently by her side, a loyal guardian. "Power is not merely destruction, and it is not measured by the armor on your skin," Diana spoke, her voice carrying the unquestionable authority of a true sovereign. "Power is the grace to heal what is broken. I may not have been born with your blood, but I have chosen this realm, and I will protect its harmony with my life." The green worm, who had insulted her first, slowly lowered his massive head until his snout touched the stone floor in a gesture of profound submission. "We were blind," the elder rumbled, his voice thick with newfound reverence. "The prophecy did not speak of the scale. It spoke of the soul beneath it. Forgive us, Queen of Gold." One by one, the massive dragons and armored figures dropped to their knees, bowing before the small human girl who had conquered their realm not with fire, but with unwavering compassion. The Dragon King walked down the steps of the dais, his heart swelling with an impossible amount of pride. He stood beside her, taking her hand and raising it high for the entire court to see. The cavern erupted in deafening roars of approval, shaking the floating island to its core. Diana smiled, leaning her head against her husband's arm. The trials of her past had forged her, and the doubts of the present had solidified her reign. She was Diana, the discarded cuckoo bird of Solace, who had soared higher than any king and claimed the heavens as her own.